Here's a reminiscing video on a game I remember quite vividly because around my circle in junior high, my friends were all talking about this one back when it came out. This is Dark Sector from 2008, one of those weird experimentation third-person shooters where you move from cover to cover a la Gears of War, but have this mutant-like glaive that you wield, which actually allows you to tear enemies' limbs apart, stun monsters, solve puzzles, and pick up weapons. This game has a bit of everything, but I would bet that there's a good chunk of people out there who probably look at this game in a negative light, as it was a bit polarizing when it came out, and well, I'm going to touch a bit upon that in this video here, as well as share my thoughts on replaying this game all these years later since, around launch. Now, Dark Sector was a game I personally was looking forward to back in 2008. I thought it just looked very interesting and just cool. This was also the era where I was just getting into YouTube, and I had an original channel before this one, so I was getting more intimately involved with gaming as my hobby, and YouTube in particular allowed me to really discover a lot of interesting and unique games that I probably would have never been given a look at. To me, Dark Sector's style of this ultra-dark dystopian Russian facility with horror and action elements mixed in just looked very cool. Now, worth noting that this was not the original vision for the game, or rather this game was to encompass an almost completely different style entirely. Now, back during development for this game, it was actually formed as part of a campaign module for a little title known as Warframe today. Yes, if you didn't actually know, Warframe and Dark Sector were originally the same game, or rather part of the same game. I believe the original vision was to have this single-player narrative and then this separate multiplayer elements, but then as development continued, the publisher at the time, and I forget exactly which company it was, but they got heavily involved and more or less, forced certain creative decisions behind the scenes. And by the time this was in the process of manifesting, Dark Sector was decidedly separated out as its own game, and Warframe would not be released for another 5 years later. So story-wise, these games do share some similar styles, but gameplay here is actually very different, and the narratives are supposedly in no way connected. So it's not as if the events of Dark Sector were in a way a prelude to the events in Warframe. Despite what some fans may believe, I think the creators actually went on record saying, no, these are completely separate games and are only spiritual successors at heart. Now, the story here isn't really anything particularly special. It definitely starts off interesting, though, and this is where it sort of intrigues me, because you're this special government agent sort of infiltrating this isolated facility, and something goes wrong. You become infected with mutation on your arm, and you have this glaive that you start to unravel the mystery behind, and you're just basically isolated on this facility where they're conducting testing. There's this virus and just different mutations and all that stuff. Honestly, it very, very much reminds you of Resident Evil in that regards. When it starts off, it almost looks like you're playing a really nice quality Resident Evil game, and then quickly, basically evolves into something else. Honestly, though, you'll forget about the plot rather quickly as you play through it. It's definitely not a reason to pick up the game by any means, and it's also short enough, or rather I should say decent in length, that you'll be completing this one within a free weekend, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. It just doesn't really make, any point to be, standing out or basically well known. All right, before we continue further, let's take a look at the box art for Dark Sector on Xbox 360. It's a pretty standard cover here. I do like the color scheme, and we have Hayden here in full view on the front with his arm and the glaive, and then a nice look at the logo there. Interesting to note that this edition of the game comes with a strategy guide, it actually says, but as I'll show off in a bit, it's a pretty stripped down version of the strategy guide. Now, opening it up here, we have a nice look at the game disc, which has the featured glaive on the disc itself, which is pretty cool. And then if we take a look at the manual, unfortunately, this is a pretty, basic, bare bones type of design. We don't really have that many pages. It's in black and white. There's not really a lot of art and stuff like that. At least it's nice that we do get a manual, but yeah, there's really not a lot of information here. It's really only the necessities that it gets into, so nothing really to write home about there. And then here's the actual strategy guide that the game comes with. Now you might be wondering, oh, it's really, really tiny, and that's because it only encompasses the first chapter, the prologue of the game. So honestly, I feel to me that this is like their way of trying to advertise basically buying the strategy guide, which for a linear game like this, you do not need. I don't even think there's that much collectibles in the games at all. So yeah, pretty interesting that they decided to include that, but I just wanted to show it off because this edition of the game kind of comes with that, and I haven't seen that before in previous physical versions. So yeah, cool look at the Dark Sector box art. Now graphically, I think Dark Sector actually looks quite decent for the time. At first glance, I was sure this was an Unreal Engine 3 game because it has all the trademark looks of what Unreal Engine 3 games typically look like from this era. But no, this is actually Digital Extreme's proprietary game engine, Evolution, which is derived actually from Unreal Engine 3. And it's the same engine that would go on to make its way into other games like The Darkness 2 and the PS3 port of BioShock, and even used in Warframe later on. Allegedly, Warframe's sequel Soulframe, which is currently in development right now, is also utilizing this engine. So it's still ongoing, which is kind of interesting to think about. But Dark Sector was really the debut title for this engine, and what we're watching here is the Xbox 360 version of the game running on an original Xbox 360 console. Sadly, Dark Sector is not backwards compatible with the Series X. However, you can still get this game on PC storefronts like Steam, so it's not entirely inaccessible, and I think on the 360 at least, we have a good looking and performant game which masks a lot of its modern visual issues through dark interiors and these really intense bloom and lighting effects. It's definitely a game which looks of the era though. There's this distinct lack of color, and everything appears to have this like filter over it, enhancing the contrast or just really the color grading. So it definitely looks its age, but I think when you compare it to other games being released around this game's launch, Dark Sector was just another one of those titles which were quickly defining the look of this era and then cementing itself amongst other similarly themed games. Now, when it comes to sound design, I think special recognition should go to the voice work of this game. The voice acting is actually fantastic. The writing could be a bit better, right? But no one here really sounds off or detached from what's really happening in the game. And the enemies that you'll be fighting and encountering in particular, I mean, they literally are screaming through their radios as you cut off their legs and arms. You definitely feel dangerous and terrifying as you sort of throw this glaive across the map and it rips off body parts and then boomerangs itself back to your hands. The voice work is just astounding in this game, and the rest of the audio package, like the visuals, does an equally decent job at really immersing you in the environments. I think sound plays a bit more of an important role in this game as well compared to others, because part of the gameplay mechanics involve, and I'll touch upon this later in the video as well, involve you picking up weapons which you can only use for a limited amount of time. And the weapons sort of beep and break, and they're done through audio cues, which you can actually hear the exact moment this is happening. And it's all thanks to a really good audio presentation. So I really feel they did a good job on that front. Now, before we finish off here, I want to speak a bit about the gameplay. Dark Sector molds the cover shooting mechanics of Gears of War with, again, giving you more advanced melee options by throwing this glaive around. The glaive is not a one-trick pony though, it actually has multiple uses, and the level design is formatted in a way to exploit the best of what this tool has to offer. You can throw this thing to knock down structures, you can throw this thing through fire or electricity, and now you are throwing a literal fire or electric bomb through the enemies. And if you're out of ammo, you can throw this thing to pick up weapons on the ground or ammo packs and then bring them back to you. As you can probably tell, the developers really thought of interesting use cases for the glaive, and it's just a shame because while this does add a bit of strategy to the combat, it still inherently feels like you've played this game before though. The movement is quite slow paced. It feels more like sort of Gears meets Resident Evil, but without any of the spectacle or quality found in those established franchises. But for what it is, I think that there's definitely some fun to be found in the game. It's not bad by any means. It's just that it gives you basically all these tools at the beginning of the game, and it doesn't really vary it up throughout its 8-hour runtime. Perhaps a better approach to this design would have been to stagnate these tools as you progress through the game, so that you don't have everything when you sort of start off. You basically progress and you start, basically unlocking different tools or finding different use cases that offer different combat encounters, and maybe having a more, open-ended combat system where you can basically approach things from different angles, which yield different, encounter types or whatnot. Overall, though, I did have fun with Dark Sector. It's one of those titles I can't really see myself going back to, but it's kind of like you play it once and then you move on. But it is an interesting game with an interesting backstory surrounding its development. I should also add that on this second playthrough, I did actually beat the game for the very first time, as back when I played it originally, I didn't get more than halfway through the game, as I just sort of found it a bit boring the more I progressed. But it's not, it's not a terribly long game, and going back to it now, I could appreciate its more creative touches, and I just wished for a bit better pacing when it came to the structure of the game's progression. In any case, let me know what you guys think if you did play Dark Sector back during launch, or if you enjoyed it somewhat recently. I'll be interested to see what you guys have to say, and hope you guys have a fantastic one, and we'll talk later. Thank you very much.